You want him to feel magnetically drawn to you. Not because you flatter him, but because you see him. Most people, especially men, are surrounded by interactions that reflect back their persona, the curated self they present to the world. That version gets applause, admiration, perhaps even lust. But what really creates addiction, what keeps someone coming back, is when you speak not to the persona, but to the man beneath it, his essence, his unguarded self. Now, this is where most people get it wrong. They assume that speaking to a man's ego, telling him how impressive, handsome, successful, or dominant he is, will win him over, and for a moment, maybe it does. But what it really does is reinforce the very shell he hides behind, the same shell that disconnects him from intimacy. So while the compliments may feel good, they don't anchor him to you. They don't make him feel known. And if he doesn't feel known, he doesn't get hooked. To build something deeper, something emotionally addictive, you need to speak to him in a way that bypasses performance and taps into identity. That means using language that subtly invites him to drop the act. You ask questions not about what he's done, but why he does it. You don't say, "Wow, you've achieved so much." But instead, what's the part of that success that no one ever sees? That shift is subtle, but it's powerful. Because now, you're not standing on the outside admiring him like everyone else. You're already inside, walking the inner corridors of his mind. He notices that. He feels that. And suddenly, you're not just another voice echoing in his head. You're the one voice that reflects him back to himself in a way he didn't expect, and didn't even realize he needed. And when you do this well, it creates a kind of emotional resonance he can't quite name. He starts to feel more himself around you, not the version of himself that the world expects, but the version he barely allows himself to acknowledge. The one that's vulnerable, scared, thoughtful, unsure. And paradoxically, it's in those unguarded moments that a man feels most deeply connected. But here's the nuance: you don't speak at him. You create space for him to reveal himself. It's not interrogation, it's invitation. You offer a sentence and leave a pause. You say, "I get the sense there's more beneath that answer." And then you wait. You let silence become the container that pulls him forward. Most people are so uncomfortable with silence, they rush to fill it. But if you can hold the pause, you create gravity. You create depth. You give him room to be real. You also want to resist the urge to perform emotional labor for him. You're not there to fix him or decode him. You're not playing therapist. You're simply mirroring truth. And men, especially those who are emotionally guarded, are drawn to women who hold a mirror, not a solution. When you reflect, you become his inner dialogue. And that's where the attachment begins. That's when he starts thinking about you, even when you're not around. Not because you entertained him, but because you touched something true. There's one more layer to this. When you speak to him like this, without flattery and without manipulation, you're showing him that you're attuned. Not reactive. That's rare. That's attractive. And that's what makes your words linger long after the conversation ends. He doesn't need more compliments. He needs someone who makes him feel real, without needing to perform. And once he feels that with you, he won't want to let it go. Addiction doesn't happen when something is always available. It happens when it's almost available. When it's close enough to stir desire, but just out of reach enough to keep you wanting. The same principle applies to conversation. If every word you say fills all the space, answers every question, and leaves nothing to the imagination, you might be impressive, but you won't be addictive. And that's the difference between being heard and being felt. Most women are taught to communicate through emotional abundance, through sharing, expressing, giving. But mystery isn't born in the overflow. It lives in the gaps. When you speak to a man, especially one who is used to being in control or being admired, what catches him off guard isn't how much you say. It's how much you don't. The pregnant pause, the unfinished sentence, the glance that replaces a word. Those are the cues that arrest his attention. You don't draw him in by giving him everything. You draw him in by letting him lean forward. There's a psychological tension that happens when someone speaks with restraint. It activates curiosity. It makes us question. It creates an internal gap we feel compelled to close. That's the tension of seduction. It's not frantic, it's composed. It doesn't chase. It invites. And when you speak with just enough softness, just enough silence, just enough space, you become the conversation he can't stop replaying in his mind. This is where power lies, in the pause. You're not withholding to manipulate. You're pausing to signal that you're self-contained. You don't need to fill the silence to be validated. You're not rushing to be understood. And that confidence, quiet, calm, effortless, disarms him. Most men expect emotional pursuit. When you offer presence instead of pressure, you become unpredictable. And unpredictability is the foundation of intrigue. There's also another dimension to this, the subtle challenge. Not in the form of aggression or dominance, but in the form of contrast. You don't always agree. You don't nod at everything. You don't flatter blindly. You offer perspective. You say, "That's interesting. I actually see it differently." And you leave it there. You don't force the debate. You invite it. You invite him. And that invitation, laced with curiosity, not control, makes him engage not just with your words, but with your mind. He sees you not as a mirror, but as a mystery. And here's the key: when you offer challenge without ego, it's even more powerful. You're not challenging him to win. You're challenging him because you value your own insight, because your inner world isn't reactive. It's reflective, and that depth makes him curious. It makes him want to unravel you, understand you, explore you. Not because you're withholding, but because you're layered. Men crave emotional stimulation just as much as physical, even if they don't always admit it. They become addicted not to intensity, but to tension, not to noise, but to nuance. And when your way of speaking creates a rhythm that isn't predictable, when it weaves between openness and pause, warmth and challenge, presence and restraint, you become a conversation he's emotionally invested in, because you're no longer just exchanging words. You're creating emotional friction. And friction is the birthplace of attraction. So the next time you speak to him, don't rush. Don't fill every silence. Let your voice carry weight, not because it's loud, but because it lands. Let your pauses ask questions your words haven't. Let your perspective provoke, not persuade. And let your silence be an invitation, not a void. Because when he starts leaning in, not just to your words, but to your presence, that's when you know you've become the voice he can't stop chasing. We often think that connection is about closeness, about revealing everything, being emotionally transparent, laying it all bare. But addiction, especially emotional addiction, is not born out of total exposure. It's born out of partial revelation. It's the space between knowing and not knowing that keeps someone coming back. And if you want him to get addicted to you, you have to master the art of mirroring his desires without fully giving yourself away. When a man expresses something about himself, his goals, his frustrations, his fantasies, most people either respond with full agreement or they redirect the conversation to their own story. But if you want to stay with him in the emotional current, the key is to mirror, not match. You reflect his language, his tone, his emotional temperature. But you don't dissolve into it. You give just enough to create resonance, and just little enough to remain intriguing. It sounds like this. I know what you mean, I've felt something similar. Or, that makes sense to me, I can relate to that in a way, though maybe not completely. You're not being evasive. You're being precise. You're signaling that you understand, but you're not collapsing into full disclosure. And what this does, psychologically, is it creates tension. He begins to lean in. He wants to fill the blanks. He wants more. Not because you're withholding, but because your energy carries elasticity. You stretch into him without losing your own shape. The most addictive people are not those who give everything. They're the ones who reveal themselves in slow, deliberate fragments. Not because they're playing games, but because they understand that desire feeds on mystery. If you show him the entire map in the first few encounters, there's nothing left to explore. But if you speak in layers, if you share selectively, reveal emotionally, and respond intuitively, he doesn't just feel heard, he feels invited. That invitation is subtle. It's psychological. You're not putting on a performance. You're creating emotional contrast. He feels like he's getting somewhere with you, but never quite arriving. He feels connected, but also curious. There's a slight distance he can't close. And that's what keeps him coming back. Not because you're emotionally unavailable, but because you are emotionally dimensional. This is where the balance becomes important. If you lean too far into his emotional space, you disappear. If you stay too distant, you become cold. The magic is in the rhythm, where his openness invites a reflection from you, not a confession. Where your presence creates safety, but your words spark inquiry. You show understanding, but you don't become a mirror. You stay a window that reveals glimpses, but not the entire view. And he will notice this. He'll notice that your attention isn't desperate, that your responses aren't predictable, that your presence doesn't demand his validation. Instead, you create a dance between expression and silence, between sharing and restraint. And that dance activates something ancient in the human psychic, the chase. But not just the external chase, the internal one. The chase to understand you, to earn your openness, to be seen more fully. Bit by bit. That's what emotional addiction feels like. It's not about control. It's about rhythm. It's not about performance. It's about presence. And when you become the person who reflects his desires with nuance and depth, without fully surrendering your emotional mystery, he will feel like he's in the presence of something rare, something he doesn't want to lose. Because the moment a man feels seen and challenged, comforted and mystified, is the moment he realizes you're not just someone he talks to. You're someone he feels compelled to figure out. Most women speak to a man's strength. They admire his confidence, his drive, his charisma. They acknowledge his talents, applaud his wins, celebrate his competence. And while those affirmations feel good, on the surface, they don't touch the places where real attachment is formed. Because the truth is, no one becomes addicted to being seen only in their light. Emotional obsession happens when someone feels seen in their shadow and still held. You want him to feel drawn to you, not just intellectually or physically, but existentially. In that quiet, unspoken way that makes him think about you when he's alone. That kind of impact doesn't come from performance. It comes from resonance, from speaking to the parts of him he hides even from himself. The insecurities, the doubts, the guilt, the failures he tries to mask with bravado. When you speak to that part of him, he also begins to bond. Because now he's not just admired. He's accepted. Not for who he tries to be, but for who he already is. And it's not about being endlessly supportive or emotionally available at all times. It's about being attuned. You read between the words. You sense the hesitation beneath his humor. You notice the flicker in his eyes when he talks about his father. You hear the things he doesn't say out loud. And in those moments, when he feels felt, not just heard, something happens inside him. He no longer feels like he has to perform to be loved. And once a man feels that kind of safety, that kind of peace, he'll begin to crave the person who gave it to him. Because no amount of physical attraction or surface level compatibility can replace the experience of being emotionally understood. That's what separates connection from obsession. It's not just chemistry. It's psychological safety. It's the relief of no longer needing to hide. And when you give that to a man, subtly, over time, without fanfare or expectation, you become the one place where he feels most himself. And once a man feels that with you, he'll return to it, again and again. Because you're no longer just someone he desires. You're the only space where he can breathe.